So the topic is the Courtroom Animal Advocate Program. And I will just give a brief introduction to our three speakers and then hand it over to them before we move into our Q&A. So just very quickly, first we have Deborah. And Deborah is the director of the Friends of Culver City Animals in California, a grassroots organization, focused on animal protection lobbying, networking, active rescue, and issues involving pets living with unhoused or senior residents. She's worked as a lawyer, a prosecutor, a court mediator, and a law lecturer in England, the United States, and in Israel. And Joyce has practiced law for 26 years. For the last 12 years, she's focused on education, legislation, and enforcement issues surrounding companion animal cruelty. She's drafted legislation in New York, including bills relating to pet dealers, rescues, and dangerous dogs. And Joyce co-founded the Fund for Animal Cruelty Treatment of Suffolk, Fund for Animal Cruelty Treatment of Suffolk, also called FACTS, which covers costs of care for animal cruelty victims whose cases are being prosecuted by the Suffolk County DA. And then finally, we have Zilla. And Zilla was a member of Justice for Desmond. This group influenced the making of Desmond's Law. This group disbanded in 2013, and in 2015, with two others, she reformed an organization called Desmond's Army. And in 2018, she became the co-founder and president of the animal advocacy organization known as Desmond's Army Animal Law Advocates. Desmond's Army has become nationally known and the recipient of multiple animal advocacy awards. So thank you all for joining us today, and I will hand it over to you so you can present.
Thank you, Tiffany, for your lovely introduction. And I also want to give a special thank you and shout out to Paula Sparks for her support in bringing this presentation to all of you today. It's a pleasure to be joining you from Los Angeles. Now, throughout my presentation, I am going to be referring to Connecticut Courtroom Animal Advocate Programs by their acronym CAPS. I'm going to start by sharing my journey to CAPS and provide some background context. Zilla is going to be talking about her work as an activist and founder of Desmond's Army. And Joyce is then going to discuss cases she's been handling as an attorney advocate. First slide, please. I want to begin today on a positive note of progress. Today, animal cruelty and neglect cases are standalone, well, they're considered standalone crimes in the United States. These cases can be charged as misdemeanors or felonies in all 50 states. Today, animal cruelty is considered serious enough for the FBI to add animal cruelty statistics to their National Incident-Based Reporting System, or what we call NIBRS. There's also the link. That's a growing nationwide movement in both the United States and the United Kingdom focused on the connection between animal abuse, domestic violence, child abuse, and elder abuse. We also now have more cross-reporting of crimes between child protection and animal protection agencies. And in fact, in December of 2024, 15 states plus the District of Columbia either permitted or mandated child protection employees to report suspected animal abuse. This is up from 12 states in 2021, and happily, Connecticut and California are amongst those states. Currently, all states require or permit vets to report suspected animal cruelty. And in 2021, the state of Connecticut Department of Children and Families published their annual report on actual and suspected incidents of animal cruelty or neglect. That year, they received 134 reports, which was vastly increased from previous years. And that shows the impact of courtroom animal advocates' work. There are also now many prosecutorial agencies with dedicated animal cruelty units, designated prosecutors, Now, this is not in every jurisdiction throughout the United States, but there are more specialized units and prosecutors all the time. There are numerous animal cruelty training programs. For example, the Animal Legal Defense Fund puts out incredible training programs for lawyers, for law enforcement, for judges, veterinarians. Various district attorneys' offices also have their own training programs, as does the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys. So animal cases have come a long ways, and they are now taken more seriously in the United States than they were in the past. But there's still a ways to go. Now, some of you may have seen the film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I'm going to share with you my Once Upon a Time in Hollywood journey to courtroom animal advocate programs. Years ago, when I was a new prosecutor in Los Angeles, a serious animal cruelty case was referred to our office. So I asked the prosecutor in charge if I could handle the case. And I was a bit surprised by his response, which was, "Why would we file this case? It's just a dog." And the case was dropped. Months later, the second case was referred to our office, and these cases were incredibly rare. So as soon as I heard about the case, I went to a different prosecutor who was involved in that case, and I said, "I volunteer to handle this case. I'm going to try this case." And he said, "But no charges are going to be filed." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, it was just a backyard dog fight." So I was a bit of a pest. I came back to his office with the suspect's police report in one hand and the suspect's rap sheet in the other hand. And the evidence showed that on the day of the animal cruelty incident, there was also a domestic violence incident. And in fact, this defendant had several convictions, previous convictions for domestic violence. So the case was filed, but only the domestic violence charges were filed, none of the animal cruelty charges. So I was quite frustrated. So I got in touch with other attorneys who were interested in animal protection issues. And I said, let's come up with a list of problems, and then we'll talk about solutions. Next slide, please. So I call these the top 10 because it's really only a partial list. And these are legitimate daily problems that we encounter in court. Not only in court, but involving animal cases. The first is the courtroom workgroup indifference. By that, I'm referring to attitudes on the part of attorneys, judges, law enforcement, witnesses, even courtroom staff. And we'd hear comments like, "So the defendant burnt a cat. It was probably a stray." Time. That is a universal problem for many lawyers and everyone. We would hear, "I'm swamped. I don't want to deal with an animal case." Priorities. "I'm handling a murder case and you want me to worry about a dead animal?" Budget. "I'm sorry, our office doesn't have money for an expert witness." Law enforcement, veterinarians. "I've never testified in an animal case before." Or, "I can't leave work to sit in a courtroom." Education. "I have no clue what to do with an animal case." Misconceptions. "Well, you know how pit bulls are." Animal sentience. "But animals are just property." Judges. Oh, we heard some great comments from judges. "Your animal case is a waste of court time. And besides, I'm a hunter and a fisherman." Culture. Now, keep in mind, Los Angeles is a big city, lots of diversity. It's fabulous. And it's really important to respect people's cultures. But one day, I was about to handle one of these animal cases, and my colleague said to me, "Where I come from, we eat dogs." I must admit, I was a bit blindsided, but we have to remain professional. So I didn't make any comments back. Now, what was the common thread through all of these challenges? that more support was needed for everyone connected with animal cases. So, one day I was reading an article published by the Animal Legal Defense Fund, and it was an article about courtroom animal advocate programs. And bells and whistles just went off. Aha, it was a real aha moment. And I thought, these programs would really help everyone. So I started to do research on CAPS. And I learned that after an uphill battle that Zilla's going to talk about, Desmond's law was finally passed in Connecticut. It took effect in October of 2016. Desmond's law was named after a dog named Desmond, who was brutally killed by his owner, and in my opinion, got off with a slap on the wrist. The full name is an act concerning support for cats and dogs that are neglected or treated cruelly, or as we refer to it as Desmond's Law. Next slide, please. Now, let's take a quick look at Section A. It says in any prosecution or in the criminal session of the Superior Court regarding the welfare or custody of a cat or dog, the court may order that a separate advocate be appointed to represent the interests of justice. If you look at line 4, it says cat or dog. And you start thinking, well, what about all the other animals that face cruelty? The original bill included all animals. In fact, the current law in Maine and the Animal Legal Defense Fund model legislation, they include all animals. But as you can well imagine, to get any law enacted requires negotiations and compromise. And in this case, the compromise was to limit the act to cats and dogs. However, there's ongoing work to amend the Connecticut law to eventually include more animals. And if you want to take a peek at line 7, it says in the interest of justice. Well, the original bill referred to in the interest of animals. But Professor Jessica Rubin of the University of Connecticut School of Law wrote in one of her articles, the final language in the interest of justice may be a compromise, but actually it's beneficial because it's broader in scope and it can cover cases of domestic violence, where there are victims besides animal victims. Next slide, please. Thank you. Now, keep in mind that it's Desmond's Army that monitors the active cases and attends court cases in Connecticut. But if you look at Section B, it says the advocate can monitor cases, consult with individuals, review records, attend hearings, present information or recommendations. So in a nutshell, this is a list of some, but not all the ways that courtroom animal advocates can help. They can review relevant court records, police records, vet records, defendant's rap sheet, in fact, all documentation. They can engage in legal research, interview witnesses, provide written work, offer recommendations to the court. They can even recommend fair sentencing for the defendants. Now, you may be thinking, aha, jail time. No, they can be creative. They can look at each defendant, each victim on a case-by-case basis and come up with an outcome that is appropriate, and it does not need to include jail time. They can also ensure animal cruelty victims receive protection, sheltering services or vet services. The program also offers training for lawyers and law students to qualify as advocates so they don't go into a courtroom cold. The program conducts educational outreach for law enforcement attorneys as well as the volunteer advocates. Next slide, please. Keep in mind that even without legislation, a judge can appoint an advocate for his or her court to serve on an ad hoc basis. But if you look at Section C, it authorizes the Connecticut Department of Agriculture to maintain the list of advocates in one department. So rather than have the list or the names scattered throughout a state or throughout different jurisdictions, all the advocates' names and ranks, etc., are housed under one roof within the Department of Agriculture. So to recap, what are the advantages of courtroom animal advocate programs? They offer valuable support for during the prosecution of cases. Now remember, they do not work for the prosecutor. They assist everyone, judges, defense attorneys, the prosecution, law enforcement, and witnesses. And the beauty is their assistance is free, and we like free. That's great. They promote the enforcement of existing animal cruelty legislation to ensure that these cases are not dropped, like the cases I described a few minutes ago. They hold offenders accountable with the hope that their work will also prevent an offender from engaging in future animal cruelty. They encourage the courts to treat animals as sentient creatures, as sentient victims, rather than, well, it's just a dog. Now, there's interest in caps in other states like California. I'm working on that one. North Carolina, Joyce is working on that one. There's interest in bringing the programs to Florida, Michigan, New Jersey, just to name a few states. Next slide, please. Now, this is not a picture of Desmond, whose brutal killing and outcome launched Desmond's army. This little pup is Dewey. Dewey came into my life as a badly abused, broken, terrified bag of bones. Just looking at him was heartbreaking. And I tried for a long time, but I was not successful in finding Dewey's abuser. But the beauty is that today, innocent victims like Dewey and Desmond are protected with more sources of legal support. And that support includes courtroom animal advocates in Connecticut and the programs to serve these victims and to promote justice for the innocent animal victims of cruelty and neglect. Now, in case you're wondering, Dewey could not be adopted out, so he joined my family like many other special needs animals, and miracles happened. And over the years, he became a service dog. And today, Dewey works with cognitively impaired seniors who absolutely adore him. So thank you for listening. And I turn the floor over to Zilla.
I had to unmute myself. Hello, everyone. I'm Zilla Canamella, co-founder and president of Desmond's Army Animal Law Advocates. Thank you, Tiffany and the UK Center for Animal Law for having us all here today. Justice for Desmond was the original group that started the movement to Desmond's Law and Desmond's Army. Desmond, the boxer mix. Oh, next slide, please. Thank you. Desmond is the boxer mix on the right. He was the victim of a domestic violence situation where the pregnant girlfriend of Alex Wooler on the left tortured, starved, and ultimately strangled Desmond to death in retaliation for leaving him. After Desmond's body was found in a garbage bag on the edge of a pond, Wooler confessed to Desmond's murder. During court proceedings, Wooler did what we refer to as judge shopping, which is waiting for a sympathetic judge to take the bench. The judge ultimately awarded Wooler with AR, which is accelerated rehabilitation. After 2 years of complying with conditions, his record would then be expunged. Obviously, we were all outraged, and many who were defeated left the group. This was not something accelerated rehabilitation was meant to be used for. Out of those of us committed to seeing justice in some way prevail, we contacted then State Representative Diana Urban. One of our co-founders asked Diana if law with the type of victims advocate could pass legislation. And Diana's response was, you know what? It's crazy enough, it just might work. It took Diana 3 long years of legislative sessions, editing the law, and calling on the remainder of Justice for Desmond to rally and testify at the Capitol in Hartford. Next, please. Now, this is Veronica Reyes. In January of 2016, ironically, the start of the legislative session when Desmond's law would pass, an egregious case of animal cruelty happened in Bristol, Connecticut. Veronica Reyes hanged 2 dogs from a tree in her front yard. Simultaneously, another egregious case involving domestic violence was being heard in a neighboring city. This was a 4-month-old puppy that had been slammed against the wall and then nearly beaten to death. At that point, I made some calls to reform us and rally our co-founders to action. We grew exponentially to what is now Desmond's Army Animal Law Advocates. Next, please. In reforming as Desmond's Army, we created a movement to get what is now known as Desmond's Law passed. It truly was a movement involving animal control officers, rescue organizations, media outlets, and one of my personal hero organizations, Animal Legal Defense Fund. There were many moving parts and hundreds that rallied to get word out of this no-brainer law with no fiscal note attached, signed into effect October 1st, 2016. Next. People who are violent to animals rarely stop there. Studies show that people who abuse their pets are likely to abuse their kids. So if you see an animal being mistreated or neglected, please report it. The parent who comes home and kicks the dog is probably just warming up. The statistics, according to Animal Welfare Institute survey, says that 89% of domestic violence survivors reported their partner using a family pet as a manipulative tool that have harmed their pet. As a domestic violence survivor whose own dog, Fang, was shot and killed in retaliation for me leaving my violent partner, I can tell you this is 100% true and happens more often than not. Next, please. This is Autumn. Joey Rosari was arrested on October 9th, 2016, just 8 days after Desmond's Law took effect. Autumn was another victim of domestic violence, being used not only as a punching bag, but as a tool for manipulation to keep the girlfriend from leaving the house. The case of Autumn was the second case where Desmond's Law was used. The impact of the advocate was significant. The offense, originally charged as a misdemeanor, was raised to a felony. Previously, this case very well could have been another accelerated rehabilitation case. On October 26, 2017, Irizarry was convicted of felony animal cruelty and sentenced to 5 years suspended after 6 months with 3 years conditional probation. Irizarry violated probation and ultimately served 3 years in incarceration. Autumn, however, went on to live a life well lived and well loved. Next, please. Desmond's Law currently only covers dogs and cats at the judge's discretion. This case is one of many reasons we need to expand Desmond's law to cover all companion animals. Ulrich did this, killed the child's backyard pet chickens to an autistic child's pet. Ulrich ultimately was incarcerated for a host of other violent crimes, evidential of the connection between animal cruelty and social violence. Next, please. This was a successful billboard campaign we did in Hartford in 2022. We received numerous calls from law enforcement and other governmental agencies thanking us for raising awareness. Next, please. I love this picture. We work with many awesome folks toward the common goal of seeking justice in animal cruelty cases. Here are some of us, including Joyce Glass and another one of our awesome advocates, Charles Farfaglia, along with Animal Control Officer Judy Umstead and Lola, her canine comfort dog. ACOs often call us to inform us about cruelty cases. In turn, we notify an advocate and hope they can take the case. I would like to reiterate that these attorney advocates are all pro bono, volunteering their time, expertise, and passion for animals. Next, please. And this is just a happy photo. This is a dog that had been stolen. Actually, the vehicle had been stolen with the dog in it, and it was returned to his owners. The dog was returned. They found the car elsewhere, and this was due to one of our rewards. Next, please. The Sauer family. And our mission as Desmond's Army Animal Law Advocates, we are a group of volunteer citizens who work together to better the lives of animals. We are committed to impacting animal welfare legislation, and we do this by being a voice for the voiceless in the courts and at the Capitol. We seek to raise public awareness regarding the statistical connection between animal abuse and domestic and social violence. In addition to tracking animal cruelty cases, notifying approved advocate of cases, attending courts throughout Connecticut, and educating the public on the connection between animal cruelty, domestic and social violence, or other predatory acts, we also provide municipalities funding for necropsies or DNA results that will aid in the prosecution of animal cruelty cases, help pay for medical expenses for victims of animal cruelty when there is an open investigation. And we provide reward funds for information leading to the positive identification of a person or persons responsible for the abandonment or cruelty to an animal. Desmond's Army Animal Law Advocates believes that one's treatment of animals is closely associated with the treatment of fellow humans. Desmond's Army seeks a better world by celebrating animals and confronting animal cruelty. We support the presence of volunteer citizens at animal cruelty court cases as a voice for the voiceless. We educate the public about the well-documented link between animal abuse, child abuse, domestic violence, and elder abuse. Desmond's Army encourages and supports the inclusion of pets in judicial protection orders and supports frequent training and exchanges among criminal justice agencies to cross-train on animal cruelty. We also disseminate information to criminal justice advocacy groups and animal control officers about animal abuse and awareness that animals are sentient beings who feel pain. Violence against animals has proven to be a reliable predictor that the abuser may become violent to people. Desmond's Army Animal Law Advocates also educates children that it is noble and worthy to report animal abuse and be a hero for any helpless animal. Pardon me. My last page fell in the dog water. What are the odds? I would like to add that we have a strict courtroom code of conduct that all members must sign and adhere to. The cases I've highlighted here all included jail time. We acknowledge that not all cases rise to the level of incarceration. Many cases are resolved with no possession of animal orders, fines, and accelerated rehabilitation when appropriate and nonviolent. Next, please. This could not exemplify our group better. Never underestimate the power of a small group of committed people to change the world. That's Desmond's Army. Thank you. Joyce?
Hi, I'm Joyce Glass, and as Tiffany mentioned, I am an animal welfare attorney who focuses on companion animal cruelty issues. Next slide, Tiffany. So Deborah showed you the language of Desmond's Law, which states in part that attorney advocates can provide information and recommendation to the court, quote, in the interest of justice. But what does that mean in the real world? It means that the attorney advocate has to tell the story of what happened. It's not only the story of the victim in the snapshot of time that led to the charges in the instant case, but it is what happened to that victim prior to the abuse and what happened to the victim after the abuse if they are alive. It is to tell the defendant's pattern of behavior and to also highlight the human connection, because in every one of these cases, there's a human connection, whether there was a child present, there was a domestic violence victim, there was elder abuse, or it could be the community at large. In order to tell that story, the attorney advocate works with any number of stakeholders. It could be the animal control officer who was first on scene and removed the animal and did a report. It could be law enforcement who was on scene and were body cameras that have to then be reviewed. It could be the veterinarian who saw the animal and has a course of treatment, has pictures, x-rays, and wrote a report. It could be dealing with other professionals in other jurisdictions regarding cases that are ongoing or past. It could mean going to those courts and pulling the files. When all of that information is gathered, it is provided to every party involved in the case, so that when the attorney advocate goes to court to tell the story, we have the facts to back up what we are saying. We are there to create a record. We create the record for that case. We create it for precedent, and we create it for legislation, whether that legislation is to amend a bill that's currently on the books or for a proposed bill. So I wanted to run through today some of the cases that I have handled in Connecticut so you can kind of see in the real world how attorney advocates, what their role is. Next slide, please. The first case example is Axel. Axel is very clearly a Siberian Husky. Axel was brought into the home, which consisted of the defendant, in this case, his significant other and 2 children, when he was 8 weeks old. Next slide, please. When he was 7 months old, a concerned community member contacted animal control. They had seen Axel yelping and limping on one where one of his legs had been impacted, and it had been going on for several weeks. The animal control officer responded to the scene, which happened to be the defendant's place of business. They spoke to the defendant, and he told them that Axel had gone into the woods to play, and when he came out, he had been limping. That was 2 weeks prior. He had not been taken to the vet. The animal control officer told the defendant to take Axel to the vet to get him checked out. But what they also did was they contacted animal control in a neighboring town, which was the town the defendant lived in, to let them know what was going on. The animal control in that other town where the defendant lived went to the home to do a welfare check and speak to the defendant. No one was home. They were leaving a notice on the door for the defendant to contact them when a neighbor came out. And the neighbor said, we have heard that dog being abused. In fact, we have a video that was shot several months prior showing the abuse to the dog. So the animal control officer asked for that video to be provided to them. In the meantime, they had made contact with the defendant's significant other and told her that the dog needed to go to the vet. They did receive the video from the neighbor, and what that video showed was Axel sitting outside the home. The defendant walks into the picture. He duct tapes Axel's snout. He drags him into the car. You do not see, but you hear him yelping from being beaten. The defendant then goes into the front of the vehicle while Axel's still in the back, and he leaves, and the video ends. So the animal control officers had that. And in the meantime, they got a call from around the same time from an emergency animal clinic about a dog. They said a dog was dropped off here. The story that the person told when they dropped off the dog does not line up with what we are seeing on examination and x-rays. That dog happened to be Axel. And what the x-ray showed was that Axel had 8 different fractures. So the fractures were weeks to months old. And at that point, the defendant was charged with misdemeanor animal cruelty. He originally tried to argue that Axel was a new member of the household and those injuries were from whoever had him before. But the animal control officer had been doing his own research, and he was able to locate vet records showing that the defendant and his significant other had taken Axel to the vet when he was about 8 weeks old, showing that they were the owners of Axel. So we know from the time he was about 8 weeks until shortly before 7 months old, he was abused over a period of time, showing because the injuries were healed for different periods of time. That was the pattern of behavior. So I worked with the foster family, the animal control, and the vet for several months. We were trying to save Axel's leg. Obviously, amputation was going to be the last resort. However, several months in, the vet did make the recommendation to amputate. And so I do have the content warning of the next slide, which is him post-surgery. Next slide, please. So this is a picture of Axel the day that his foster family went to pick him up after his leg was amputated. This picture was provided to the court, as was the video. So, if you are describing what happens, the story to the court, it is one thing to be able to say the words, what happened, and for me to tell that he had 8 different fractures. But the pictures in the video show what these victims go through and what the consequences are based upon the defendant's actions. The outcome for Axel was very good. He was adopted by his foster family. He is doing fine as a tripod. This case was resolved. The defendant in this case did receive accelerated rehabilitation. We did put a whole host of conditions on there, including that he had to pay restitution. He was not permitted to have animals for a certain period of time. I also, in this case, did make a point to mention that there were 2 children in the home that witnessed this pattern of abuse. The significance of that is we know that a child's exposure to the treatment of animals, positive or negative, informs how they treat humans and animals in childhood into adulthood. And they certainly can become desensitized to the cruelty if that is what they witness. Next slide, please. This is the next case of Buddy, before and after. The picture on the left is Buddy the day after he was seized by animal control. He has a very sad face. His eyes look very drawn. The picture on the right is Buddy after several months after that first picture was taken when he was in a foster home. The story with Buddy was that the defendant, who was his owner, became agitated when his wife did not answer her phone at work, and he put a shocker collar on Buddy and continuously shocked him. When his wife came home, she did hear the tail end of this abuse. The defendant left the home, and she called law enforcement, who came with body cameras on, along with animal control. The defendant's child was in the home when the abuse took place. The body cam footage basically showed what looked like a murder scene, because every time Buddy was shocked, he would bite his tongue, and there were bloody paw prints throughout all of the rooms that he was in when he was being abused. He did suffer puncture wounds to his neck and to his tongue where he bit his tongue. Despite what he had gone through, when animal control approached him, which was on the scene that night, he was very friendly, and they removed him from the scene without incident so that he could go to the vet. In this case, the judge wanted to hear from the defendant's spouse, who was a victim as well. I contacted her through her divorce attorney. This was a delicate situation. I told her if she could please make a statement, it would be helpful. And she was more than willing. She came in with a victim's advocate. And, in these cases, a lot of times we have to put our emotion aside all the time to present the facts. But I have to tell you, the statement that she made, detailing what she went through, what Buddy went through, and what another dog went through that they had. Everybody in that courtroom, including the judge, was visibly moved by what she said. I knew from the file that there had been another dog in the home, and that she was able to get that dog to safety and told the defendant that the dog ran away. And that dog had been abused in the same manner. And then what the defendant did was he just went out and bought another dog, which was Buddy. So I spoke to her after court. I showed her the before and after picture because she was the one that made the call and was able to get him out of that situation. One of the things that she did talk about in her victim statement was that the defendant had told her, I wish I could put this shocker collar on you because you are going to be the next one that I'm going to put it on. I spoke to her after court to ask her if there was anyone that could corroborate what she was stating about the prior dog to show the defendant's pattern of behavior. She was able to put me in touch with a prior neighbor of theirs. And I spoke to her several times. She was a lovely woman. She was able to give me a lot of detail on what she heard, the abuse that she heard during the time that the defendant lived next door to her. And it was basically the same pattern. If he had a bad day or something wasn't going his way, he would put the shocker collar on the other dog and do the same thing. And so in this case, this was somebody who clearly should not be able to have animals. In Connecticut, we are not permitted to ask for a lifetime ban on ownership. We were at one time. The law has since changed. We had many meetings, many pretrial hearings on this issue in particular. And finally, I was able to argue that there should be some sort of length of time that should be as significant as possible for him not to have animals. And what was agreed upon was in the order of protection that was being given to the wife and to the daughter. He was not to threaten or harass or injure any animals they had. But in addition, for 25 years, he was not to own animals at all, which was the length of time for the order of protection. So I was happy with that outcome in that case. Buddy was adopted by his foster family, and he travels quite a bit from what I understand, and he lives a great life. Next slide, please. The Philip Lynn matter. This case concluded in December of 2024. This was a very long case. Philip Lynn had victims in multiple states. It was a very multi-layered case with many, many issues going on. From the time that the first animal was killed in this case to when he was sentenced, it was nearly 3 years. The story with Philip Lynn started when a social worker visited his home in March of 2022 for some issues going on there. His mother told the social worker that he had killed a dog. That social worker did report that. About 2 months later, another social worker went to the house, a different one, and the mother told that social worker that he killed another dog. So an investigation started. There were allegations that he killed other animals and possibly sexually abused at least one, but he was only charged with 2 felony animal cruelty counts. The first dog that he killed, which was an elderly dog that was about 6 years old. It was a dog in his home. Both of them were. He punched the dog in the face and the dog drowned in a bathtub. And the second one, he snapped the dog's neck. Philip Lynn violated his conditions of release almost immediately. He took off his ankle monitor and fled and was found hiding in a closet in his mother's home about 6 months later, at which time he was a flight risk, so he was incarcerated. I knew from the file that there were charges pending in Vermont, but there was not a lot of information on them. About a year into the case, I contacted the Vermont prosecutor to see what was going on with the cases there. The Vermont prosecutor did not know anything about the Connecticut felony animal cruelty charges and was very interested in hearing what was going on, especially because Philip Lynn had entered into a plea deal in Vermont, but had not yet been approved by the court. The charges there were 21 counts. One was for assaulting an elderly woman. One was for luring a 13-year-old on Snapchat, and the others were for larceny, burglary, and some drug charges. He was, under that plea deal, was supposed to register as a sex offender. That entire file was sent to me. I provided it to all the parties in the case. I read the entire file, but the report regarding the 13-year-old in particular was some of the most disturbing. It was one of the most disturbing reports I had ever read. Based upon his conduct in the Connecticut case, and the fact that the charges for the felony animal cruelty was after the Vermont charges, the judge in the Vermont case decided there was not going to be a plea deal and he would have to come back to Vermont to face all of those charges. So I kept in touch with the Vermont prosecutor. They did communicate with the state of Connecticut that they do plan to extradite him, which is not something that we hear of often because many jurisdictions do not want to incur the cost for that. Philip Lynn was sentenced in December of 2024. Based upon the sentencing guidelines in Connecticut, he will be released sometime in 2025, and he will be extradited to Vermont to face the other charges up there. In this case, I did make note on the record that he targeted the most vulnerable of society, an elderly woman, a minor, and animals. And the judge did make note on the record that he was very concerned about his tendency to harm people and then animals as well. And that was brought up because of a report that a mental health counselor did while Philip was incarcerated. Next slide, please. Animal cruelty does not occur in a vacuum. There is always something else going on in these cases. There's always a human connection. In every single case that I have ever been involved in, there is a human involved. Next slide. And finally, I just want to end with this. When animal crimes are prosecuted, our communities are safer. This is a statement that I made at a press conference several years ago. It means that when animal crimes are taken seriously, when the court is provided with the full story, when these cases are properly prosecuted, that is when we get the best resolution, and there are consequences that can act as deterrents so that we can stop a cycle, we can stop escalation, and animal cruelty does not become a gateway crime to human violence. I want to thank everyone for being here today. Again, a very special thank you to the UK Center for Animal Law for allowing us to present and educate on this issue, to show how attorney advocates can be part of the process and the resolution in animal cruelty cases.
Thank you all very, very much. Very sad to hear, but amazing to see the work that you're all doing for animals, and of course people as well. Would anyone like to ask a question? Please pop it into the chat if you would like to. I'd be happy to kick off with a question for either of you to kind of touch on. I'm very curious about enforcement. So if they do have a 25-year prohibition on keeping an animal, how is that enforced?
Zilla, you want me to take that one? Yeah, it is certainly an ongoing battle often. I have done a lot of work in New York, and when you have a unit in place, it has to become a priority. So, when these things are done, like for instance, in Suffolk County, New York, they do spot checks. In Connecticut, a lot of times it comes from people reporting who are keeping eyes on these cases, because a lot of these cases are in the news. if there's a hoarding case or a particularly brutal animal cruelty case. So the enforcement is a whole other, it's a whole other issue that does have to be addressed. I always say it all the time, when a law is passed, it's so hard to get it passed, but the real work begins after, because these laws do have to be enforced. And a lot of times that has to do with educating whoever is supposed to be enforcing. Okay, so that could be the animal control officers, it could be law enforcement, it could be Department of Agriculture, sometimes the Department of Health.
Also, there's a lot of tipsters that come forward, and they'll contact us, and in turn, we will contact the appropriate authorities to go and do a wellness check or see if there's an animal in the home where there shouldn't be. So, there's also a lot of public participation as well.
That's perfect. Thank you. Would anyone else like to ask a question? Oh, let me just see. I think there's one. Okay. An excellent presentation, Stephen says. Could I ask, in the case examples, Buddy, Axel, could a particular motive be established why the offender engaged in the animal abuse?
Well, in Buddy's case, Buddy was the way that the defendant exerted power and control over the spouse, because the rest of that story was that if anything happened with the dog, like the dog was injured, or if they happened to be walking the dog and the dog would, defecate outside, the husband would scream for his wife to come and remedy the situation, right? So in that case, it was power and control. In Axel's case, I don't really know. We just know that the dog himself, he was very well-behaved dog. I met him several times. There were no behavioral issues. Not that that would ever be an excuse, right? So I don't know in Axel's case, but the pattern of behavior was very clear because we had the healed injuries.
Thank you, Joyce. Just checking the chat. Okay, we've got another question here. You said there's always a human connection, and obviously this link is important. Do you feel that your success in introducing this legislation and in the individual cases has rested on making the link to humans and social harm rather than justice for animals on its own?
Zilla, do you want to answer that?
I would say yes, because initially, people would come to us and they still do in court. Why the animals? Why are you doing this for the animals? How come you're not doing this for the kids or the people or and so when you explain to them, if you stop it at the animals, it all starts there, because they are your most vulnerable population. They can't tell. They can't tell what's happening. And then the light bulb goes on, and they're like, oh, I never thought of that. So yes, when you make that connection, I hope I answered the question. When you make that connection, the light bulb does go on, and it helps it helped in legislation. When Desmond's law was passing, I told my full story, and that connection was made there because nobody was thinking about it then.
The only thing I'll add to that is, if I speak to legislators or sometimes law enforcement, sometimes people are not animal people, but when you make the connection as to why these crimes are important to address, then they get it, right? So in one of the things that we are doing in Connecticut now to kind of like give more of a whole picture is we're working with DCF because there's cross-reporting in Connecticut. So that's tracked. And especially because of Desmond's law, it's a little bit more comprehensive. So basically what happens is if DCF goes in and there's an animal in the home, they have to report it to Department of Agriculture. So an animal welfare check can be done and vice versa. And when you look at those cases of how many times it happens where there's a child in the home or an animal, whatever the first call is, whoever goes there, and there's the other issue is going on, right? So it's both together.
Thank you. We have another question for you all. An amazing session tonight, Sarah says. I'm wanting to become an animal welfare lawyer, and I'm very interested in supporting those through domestic abuse. So the relation between domestic abuse and animal cruelty is very interesting. Do you have any suggestions on how I could start on becoming an animal lawyer in this field?
I can chime in on that one, and Joyce and Zilla will probably want to add some information as well. There are numerous internships and volunteer opportunities through, for example, the Animal Legal Defense Fund, In Defense of Animals, the Humane Society of the United States, and also through various district attorneys' offices where they might have animal cruelty units, and also local organizations that can link you, Sarah, with lawyers who are working in the area of animal cruelty law. And I just wanted to mention, Tiffany, if you have a slide with our contact information, please feel free to put that up with some other resources.
Yeah, I was going to mention that as well. Sarah, you feel free to contact us. You know, it's much different now than when I graduated. Animal law was not a thing, but it's very prevalent now. And a lot of the lawyers that do this, they have a regular practice and then they will take on these cases. So that's also, that opportunity is also there. So that you can, if you can't get something full-time in animal law or to work for one of the organizations, you can still do it. So there's a lot of opportunities, but feel free to reach out to Deborah or I, with any other questions.
Also, I'm involved a lot, not only doing my doctorate in this area, but working politically in animal cruelty law. And so there are a lot of contacts through various politicians who are involved or interested in these issues through the state capitals, through the local government, that also can put you in touch with not only the law schools, but the organizations and the individual lawyers. And do feel free to contact us.